On this episode of Market Proof Marketing, we have Dennis O'Neil on the program. He's been the president and founder of Vanilla Interactive, now going on over 16 years.
Yeah, I feel old when I think about it that way, but yeah.
And
Thanks,
for
Kevin.
those of you who may not know, you also worked with a home builder for 8 years, almost 8.5. Ryland
Yeah.
Homes, small little organization. Where did they end up going? Where did Ryland go?
So Ryland merged with Standard Pacific a couple years, probably like 2010. It was a couple years after I left, and then ultimately they became Cal Atlantic
Right.
Homes. Cal Atlantic only existed as a brand for a few years, and Lennar ate them. So,
Okay.
you know, I have
You're an excellent R alum.
Yeah, so
I mean,
I have
that's what people
actually
do.
division friends, people that used to work in the Baltimore division of Ryland that I still keep in touch with, who now work for Lennar. Literally, the settlement coordinator at Lennar in Baltimore just had her 38th anniversary, um, continuously employed, sort of with the same organization.
I
But yeah.
almost feel compelled to help people understand on a continual basis how little show prep we do. So let me ask you a question that I know you have. What was the craziest experience you had as a sales manager at Ryland?
Oh,
No
jeez.
names. You don't have to give names, but just
Yeah, I
like
was gonna say.
weirdest thing that.
Um, let's see. It's hard to pick one. A lot of them probably happen on the sales contest trips. You know, those are those are
Uh-huh.
the
Yeah.
career defining
Not
slash
safe for
ending
work. Skip
moments,
those.
right?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So there's definitely a few of those that involves, copious amounts of drink and things like that. But um,
One
I'd
of my
say it was
favorites was when a salesperson just took all the furniture from the model home for from two of the rooms because they had family coming to visit and they needed more furniture for the holidays, so they just took them out of the model.
that is hilarious. That is hilarious. We had a guy, we had a salesperson sleeping in his model because he
Mm-hmm.
was having
Too
some
common.
other troubles and needed a place to stay and figured it would be no big deal. And
Yeah. That also
yeah,
happened. We discovered it because we were touring a model and the shower was wet everywhere. It was, like 9:30 in the morning. We're like, what's going on here, man? I'm going through a divorce, don't have a place to stay, thought it would be fine. No, it's not okay to live here.
no, definitely not. No, I came into one of my first models one day. I was only with the company for like 6 months maybe, and I was a salesperson. I showed up in my model, unlocking everything, and I opened up the closet to put my coat in the closet, and there's a woman's dress hanging in the closet that I know was not there the day before. And I was totally baffled. I was like, did I not walk into the model? I was like worried I went into somebody's house. And it turns out that another salesperson who used to work at that model had a friend who was going to stop by and pick up this dress. So they dropped it off and put it in the closet and failed to let me know. And I'm like, the whole time I'm thinking, like, who broke into the model and dropped off a dress? Yeah.
That's great. Okay.
Yeah.
That's not why we brought you here. We brought you here today to talk about websites because look, Dennis, right now the time in the marketplace is the typical spring selling season would already be rolling over, headed
Mm.
the other way about now. This year, most people never felt the supreme highs that we love feeling of a spring market. And so the feeling generally is some uneasiness of like, I don't know, things could be better. They're not terrible. No one's saying they're terrible, but it's and inevitably what comes up a lot is, well, there's two ratios that builders are struggling with right now. And well, I'm not even going to lead it to more than that. One is appointment to sale.
Mm.
Appointment to sale ratios generally under 10%, and under 10% doesn't work for the rest of the math of the customer journey. And the other is traffic to lead. And people are certain that there's just some magic color or text that they put on a website to increase conversions. And so when you reached out and said, "Hey, I've been doing some research that I think is kind of interesting," I thought, well, if there's anything else we can talk about other than which shade of red or orange is most likely to, because that's not it. That's not the answer. And
No,
I think
we're
for this
introducing
people,
flashing buttons next time.
we're back to animated GIFs and hamster
Right.
dance and all
Right.
the rest. It just hit me that 90% of our audience probably has no idea what hamster dance is.
What about like
Google it,
spinning
kids,
envelopes or something
or
like
ask
that?
ChatGPT.
Mm.
Okay, so but this is the other reason I like what we're going to talk about is that this is something tangible that
Mm.
is not just a feeling. So introduce us to kind of where you want to go, and then I'll ask you questions like I don't know because I probably don't.
Gotcha. So the component that we've been talking a lot about most recently is a new set of rules from Google that actually have been around for they're not new, so I shouldn't even use the word new anymore. You may have heard the phrase Core Web Vitals. So Core Web Vitals were actually introduced by Google in 2020 and first started impacting search in 2021 and spring of 2022. Basically, they rolled it out over a period of time over mobile and then desktop. But essentially, it is a set of metrics that measure the performance of a website in an effort to define how good of a user experience the website provides. Yeah, and there's no secret that Google has said before that they want to be able to give the links, the 10 blue links on the page should be the best experience possible for the consumer and meet their needs, right?
Yeah.
So way back when they obviously rolled these out, we've been paying attention to them before they launched, but it's definitely becoming an increasingly common conversation. And there's a lot of reasons that we love Core Web Vitals. There's a lot of unique things about it in terms of how it measures performance and how it grades builders. Um, and there's a lot of history behind it. Even though they just really started talking about it in 2020, we can actually pull data from Core Web Vitals stats from the Google database all the way back to 2017. So they were collecting these data points for years, sort of like probably I hope at least they were sort of working behind the scenes to tweak what they thought their right measurement should be. So
First terrible question then is when we say user experience, I think the average person is going to say interactive tools, detailed information, great photos.
yeah.
Is that what you mean?
No, it was a great point, right? And this is not the kind of user experience like that, which is definitely part of user experience and is also important. But think of Google's job is to basically measure the entire web, every single website out there. What kind of universal metrics can they come up with that can sort of be applied across the board? And there are three major ones. You'll most of the time they're referred to by their initials. But regardless of what their initials are, essentially the three main things they measure are website speed, website responsiveness, and visual stability, so that things don't bounce around on the page when they load. But those three components are very
Same again.
measurable
Same
items.
one more time.
Yeah. Oh, so one more time. I'm sorry. So it is website speed.
Loading speed.
Loading speed, exactly. How fast does a page load after you request it?
Okay.
And then it is responsiveness. So how quickly do things happen when you click on the page? Maybe not
Not just initial load, which is I think what typically you think of in terms of speed, but ongoing responsiveness as you go through your journey.
Exactly. Even it could even be an example of when you hover and a menu opens.
Yeah.
Same kind of thing.
On-page stuff that's not changing URL structure, not necessarily even loading new content.
Exactly.
Okay.
So all of that comes under responsiveness. And then visual stability. So as an example would be if you've probably been in those scenarios where you've maybe loaded a blog post somewhere and you're halfway through reading it, or you've gotten into the second paragraph, and all of a sudden the content you're reading just slides off the page someplace else because an ad loaded above you, right? Or behind it, something. So that kind of non-user.
I'm going to say this. You don't have to say this, but both Builder Online and Pro Builder have to be some of the worst scored websites when it comes to that.
I should
like
look
all
them
these
up.
pop-ups and random, like I send people, hey, here's an article, and they're like, I can't read it on my phone.
Yeah, it is that
freezing.
Number 4, I want to say on Google's list, it's not specifically one of the Core Web Vitals, but it is avoid interstitials, which is basically those kind of ads that cover the whole page that don't let you do anything until you click that teeny tiny little X to move on. Right. So yeah, it's lots of interstitial ads on those sites. You bet.
Got it.
Lots of them.
Okay. So now that we know what those three things are, and that's Google's, again, perspective of user experience.
True. Yes.
Meaning
Yeah, they define these.
is it okay for me to summarize it as the technical reasons that consumers would become frustrated with
I think
like
that's safe to say.
the overall framework and experience of using your website?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I
Okay.
think that's absolutely safe to say because these are objective measurements, right? And I think that's essentially what Google needed to find is, what way can they objectively measure an absolute, like, sure, I guess today maybe they could be looking at having AI critique the layout or the structure, or the flow of a website experience, but that's not really what these are about. These are about hard
Yeah.
numbers that they've been collecting since 2017. Yeah.
And this is also where tell us if this is related or not related. When a builder gets emails like, "Hey, you've got a piece of content where the font is really hard to read."
Mhm. So it wouldn't necessarily, Core Web Vitals itself would not critique a font necessarily that's hard to read. It does, fonts come into play sometimes when, if you've ever noticed, sometimes you'll load a website that might be running a little bit slow and you'll see like a generic font at first, and then all of a sudden it snaps and pops and there's a prettier font that loads after that, right? So that is actually an example of visual instability,
Yeah.
and sites will get negatively dinged for that kind of behavior. So,
Yeah.
so fonts do come
There's
into play
lots of
that way.
different warnings kind of that I see some of the builders we work with getting on a somewhat regular basis. Usually when they're running a website based on HubSpot or WordPress,
Mm.
that's coming from Search Console. They're just constantly saying basically, here's some form of bad user experience. You need to go check
Right.
this out.
Yeah, I will say that's one of the nice things that Google has done in the last probably 18 months is they've significantly improved visibility into Core Web Vitals through Search Console. Um, you know, it, Previous to that, there's been plenty of information available to collect about Core Web Vitals performance, but it's not necessarily been in a nice sort of user interface. We had to use Google's APIs to be able to get in and sort of unearth the
Okay.
data.
Here's my
So,
last sarcastic, stupid question.
oh, come on, we got more
When it
sarcasm.
comes, like when we say that Google is concerned about getting the customer their answer, I think I agree with you when it comes to their core product of search. Once we start talking about display and other things that Google does, I'm like, I don't think they care anymore. I think it's about getting a buck and making sure that like it gets trickier, I guess I should say, just all of the programmatic spam and spoofing and kind of technical
Mhm.
terms crap that goes on there. And
Yeah.
then when it comes to search ads, we know that a lot of the recommendations are also suspect. Like, you could spend way more money if you wanted to. Yes, we
Right.
did. We
Well,
did
I have
know.
a great
So
way. Great way you can get more traffic. Yeah.
what would be the way you would convince the skeptical Kevin to say, a lot of times Google creates stats that are really just a gamification to make you feel bad for not doing what they tell you? Why do you feel like this is a different category? I think it is, but
It
I
is.
also think it's a good exercise just to check
Yeah.
it.
No, that's a good point. I will say two things. One, this is Google has never made a claim that a positive Core Web Vitals sort of assessment or score has any impact on advertising effectiveness. What they do say is that it will enhance an organic listing, right? So your chances to compete to get into in organic listings. What I really like about Core Web Vitals is not only is that it is very measurable, right? Which we know as a historic in history, really, SEO is not such a thing. We say it is measurable,
Yeah.
and it is to some extent, but
It's
it's always
measurable
there's
if
all
you give me 2 years, Dennis, which was almost like a joke in of itself because we know that the average, you know, sales
markets change.
manager, VP of sales, they're probably not even going to be in that same position in 2 years. So when we go back
Right.
to reports it, like, give me enough time until you no longer work here to prove that this is really getting us. And that's a joke.
Right.
But that's how most bad SEO folks kind of talk about it.
Yeah, SEO is subject to so much misdirection and misinformation because even legitimate knowledge is always essentially assessing something that's behind a very dark curtain.
Yeah.
Like the whole job is to sort of reverse engineer a massive multi-billion-dollar company that
Hmm.
doesn't really want you to know everything. They just give you little bits and pieces, and you're
Yeah.
hoping they're not doing too much
I think
misdirection
that's
of their own,
why
right?
I trust the Core Web Vitals metrics and conversation more is the things that I see Google recommending that are bad
Mm.
almost exclusively fall under the idea of, you don't need to worry about that. Just give us more control. Give Google more
Right.
control. Whereas this is kind of almost the opposite of them saying, I mean, it's your website. You do what you
Mhm.
want,
Yeah.
but these are things that we know will have a negative impact on the customer experience that are under your control. And they're not offering to, like, if they were offering to click this button and we'll optimize your website, then
Fix
I'd be
it,
like,
right. Yeah, no, that's a
I don't
good point.
know.
Yeah, they're basically saying, "We can't help you, but here's some problems." So,
Right.
I will, the biggest thing in that along that same line really is that this is not, we've always talked, SEO world is always like, well, make sure Google can find what you want them to find when they crawl your websites, right? So when Googlebot comes out and
Mm,
crawls the website, it's always about sort of serving the request from Google. Well, the
yes.
difference with Core Web Vitals is the stats that they collect. So the stats that you get in terms of, is your website fast enough? Is it stable enough? Is it responsive enough? Actually comes from real user data. So it's collected via browsers and it's
Mm.
collected from all devices. It's billions and trillions of, I'm sure it's trillions of website page views that get collected and measured and then cumulatively reported upon. So like we've actually
So this
seen,
is, I think, I just want to reiterate that because it's really important. What you're saying is this is not just based upon bot crawling activity, which would be in some ways kind of the ideal, only because you have to imagine that Google's bots have all the bandwidth and horsepower and whatever to have the most fast, most optimal
Mhm.
responsiveness and load time, et cetera. This is just average user experience.
Exactly. And it is very much determined by lots of variables. And, some people would say, well, to your point, Kevin, obviously, if Google's got this super fast, powerful request engine that can snap things up really quickly, and my website's designed for that, then that's great. It doesn't really matter if most of my users are using 3G cell phones, it's okay but Google thinks that we're great. Well, we've actually seen, a couple of years ago, we had an incident where one of a client was in a hurricane area and there was they were out of, that area was out of power for weeks, lots of downtime, lots of utilities out that month. Their website speed score spiked. And it was because nobody had high speed internet then. So
Mm,
many people that were visiting the website had to use traditional,
that's
either a cell phone
fascinating.
connection, a 3G, a 2G connection, something like that. So we actually saw the impact. And Google's argument in favor of that approach, which can't disagree with them at all, is that your website should be optimized to meet the needs of your user. Just because this is sort of it levels the playing field. This is not about how much, it's different than ads where you can win if you want to spend enough money. This is something where there's really I mean, it takes an investment, sure, if you're really invested in optimizing everything you can do for Core Web Vitals performance. But, we've seen there's a huge disparity. Like just because big builders are big builders, doesn't necessarily mean they're focused on Core Web Vitals. And I can tell you that wholeheartedly. So this is basically about who's ever willing to invest the time to make sure that their website performs as
Yeah.
best as it possibly can for their user base. Then you've got an advantage. You've got a leg up in the search results.
So I'm looking at a lot of this data here that you're showing me, and we're not going to use names, but I can't help but make this connection. A lot of the top 20 just perusing through here do
Mhm.
not have great core web vitals. But is
Yeah.
that also because this is an order of, I think, closings? Yeah, it is closings because I can see who number one is. So
Yes.
does that mean that most of these folks probably have Android users? Because like this is it's a socioeconomic thing, right? Is
Uh-huh.
what I'm speaking to is people who have the fastest devices that are going to provide the best core web vitals. I don't think
So
that
you're thinking
plays
like the
out, but
higher end, lower volume customs, maybe is what you think?
exactly. Yeah. Would that play into it at all? I don't, it's not really playing out when I look in here because a certain high end builder that most people would know also has bad scores. But that was my initial thought was like, well, maybe, I mean, let's just use, I'm going to talk about DR Horton just because they're number one. Like who
Mm.
doesn't, but you look at, and they have some struggle bus numbers on some of these things.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, maybe that's just because they're targeting, the person who can least afford to upgrade their phone every
Mm.
year or two. but
Yeah, I
no,
think it's bigger
doesn't
than
pan
that.
out. Just a
Yeah.
theory.
Yeah, no,
Didn't
I'm
work.
with you. It's, you know, so to be fair, the list that you're looking at is we've been tracking, you know, the top 200 builders, right? So in sort of, you know, maybe you want to have a better time with Core Web Vitals speeds if, you know, we truly go the route of high-end custom. I'm not saying there's not a high volume production, high-end custom, right? But like, I mean, we're going down into builders that are still production builders selling 150, 200 homes a year at the bottom of that list there, right? So there's definitely that same sort of first time buyer, you know, at both ends of the spectrum, I think, right? So I think that the difference really has been a lot of times it's not always something that builders are paying attention to. And I know that for sure. And I understand why. I mean, builders have got a lot to pay attention to right now. And so
You can
this
say
is,
no, Dennis, but it just also occurred to me, could builders reach out to you and say, I'm curious what your score shows that I like? Obviously, you're not doing anything that they couldn't do on their own, but if someone wants to just
Mhm.
say, hey, can you send me the scores that you've tracked on my own organization? Is that something that your team could do or you could do?
Absolutely. Yeah, it is. It's definitely, it is something we can do and have done. You know, happy to sort of both give everyone access and direct them how they could collect it in the future themselves if they chose to, but we can certainly give them sort of the historical performance of their site. That's sort of the other thing that I love about Core Web Vitals is it's public. So that's
Yeah.
which is how we pull, you know, everything, you know, all the websites of the Builder 200. Um,
You don't just
and
have four
let them know how they
interns
rank as compared to everybody
tracking it for
else.
you. Yeah, right.
What's that? I'm sorry?
You don't have four interns tracking all this for you. You're
No,
saying
no. Yeah, they can reloading the page and they're writing down numbers. Yeah, right. We pulled the data. We use, you know, we use the Core Web Vitals APIs to pull the data. You know, so obviously it's much more efficient that way. But we've also ranked, right? So there's those three metrics, and we look at those. We pull those 200, all the 200. I'm saying the Builder 200 from
Mhm.
Builder Magazine. We use that list and say that's probably a great representative example of the industry. And we pull those once a month. And um, we could at least tell you, even though like we've never, I've been so tempted at many times to be able to sort of wanted to share the entire list. But then obviously it's not, my goal is not to, our goal is not to shame anyone.
Yeah, right.
But for those builders who are interested, we can at least tell you what your scores are and then tell you where you'd rank on the 200. You know, if you're in the, if whether or not you're in it or not, as compared to everybody else, hey, you're in the top 20%, you're in the bottom 50, because that's your competition. You know, if this is about improving your organic results, your competition is other home builders, right? Um, so this is comparing yourself against this group as opposed to the entire internet is, you know, much more effective. These are the people that you're competing against.
Yeah,
So,
and I've a couple of the ones that had really good scores I've pulled up and played with. And it is kind of it's that feeling which you don't typically associate with your desktop computer experience,
mm,
but it's like when you get a brand new iPhone
mm, everything's
and you're
snappy.
like, oh man, everything's just moving and responding.
Mhm,
And then it slowly, I'm having that feeling as I'm going on some of these websites.
mm,
And again, not to shame or celebrate anyone, I'm on stylecraft.com right now. That thing is just like, as soon as I click it, I feel like I'm
mm,
on to the next thing. And
yeah.
I'm clicking on community pages and map pages and inventory pages, clicking on the menu, and it doesn't matter. It does feel like something different is happening. So
Mhm.
to the extent you want to talk about either how your team approaches it or how builders should be approaching Core Web Vitals, I think that's a good place to kind of head to next.
Okay. Yeah, no, great. Happy to. I would say like it's been something, you know, we've been paying attention ever since Google announced it in 2020. You know, we're in the early times we were sort of just watching, looking at numbers, trying to figure out exactly what changes move the needle. And frankly, in the early times, as you can imagine, the early days, we were also just trying to validate that, you know, Google wasn't just going to close the whole thing next year, you know, like they do so that sometimes, right? So we were partially a little cautious about over investing in this new measurement if Google was going to abandon it, right? So, um, you know, obviously it's not going anywhere. They've already made adjustments to it. They've improved it. We're on, you know, definitely version 2. They even changed. They swapped out one of the metrics for another one. So it's here to stay for sure. in terms of how we approach Core Web Vitals, in general, we do a lot of things from a platform perspective. There are, Homefinity, which is what all of our websites are based upon. We look for opportunities where we can make sort of system-wide improvements to Homefinity that have an impact for all of our builders. So there's things that we can do for speed. There's things that we can do for responsiveness. And we've done a significant number of them over the years to be able to sort of gradually improve and increase those numbers. And so much beyond those levels, right? Beyond the just sort of like brute muscle of the engine behind a website. Core Web Vitals performance is so very specific to every website. Because the smallest thing can make something bounce a little bit. And one of the only sort of frustrating components at times is that sometimes behavior that is, I would say, invisible to the human eye, unfortunately gets dinged because Google detected a split second, 50 millisecond span of time where something shifted, and nobody saw that, but Google saw it, and you still get dinged for it. So sometimes it's taken a little bit of creativity to sort of figure out exactly where it is, but those issues are, specific to every single site, unless you're talking, obviously template sites would share the same issue, but, we do custom sites for each builder. That particular site, we need to optimize for things to make sure that pages load the way they're supposed to,
Yeah. So between speed, responsiveness, and visual consistency, or I forget exactly. Stability. Which one does INP stand for?
INP is responsiveness.
Okay.
So it's short for interaction to next paint, if that doesn't sound fancy.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Well, now actually it's all coming back to me. Some of my nerdiness that I intentionally forgot has returned. What is it about how some websites that seems to be the one that has the widest, I'll just say, disparity between different website providers? Is that why do you think that is? Here's the thing. I hear a lot about, well, you go first, and if you say something different than what I'm thinking, then I'll ask you my question.
Gotcha. So we also track in terms of all of the builders that we track. We also identify the platform that the builders are using, right, to power the website, because that gives us some insight into, good and bad performance components of all those platforms.
Right.
One of the sort of similar characteristic of a lot of the builders that struggle in interaction to next paint is they use one of the, I can't say this without being technical, but one of the JavaScript front end frameworks.
Okay.
So
well, that's where I was going to go. So are we talking about things like, oh shoot, the language developed by Meta, or
React, right?
What's the other one? React, and then
Angular is another popular. That's Google's version. Yep. So Google, React and Angular are probably the two most popular front end JavaScript frameworks. And they were obviously React began, is backed by Meta. If you think of Facebook, obviously that sort of experience that, you have 50 components on your page that need to update at any given time, and you're not expecting them to refresh to see new notifications that go off, right? So there's a zillion different connections that are going on to the dashboard or sort of the back end of Facebook at any given time.
Yeah.
Well,
and it's
all of that stuff
experience.
It's sort of it's a different experience than a shopping experience or a brochure experience, right? But despite that, JavaScript frameworks have become very popular over the years. It's never been a course that we have taken, sort of a path that we have taken, and there's a lot of other nerdy technical reasons.
But that must mean you aren't able to personalize anything.
No, which is not true.
Again, this is evil Kevin coming out a little bit, because I hear this all the time. It's like, well, the reason React and Angular would be used is because that allows everything to be personalized or more real time.
So no, but I understand why that is a kind of a common assumption, but definitely not the case. We absolutely can do, and often do. We use personalized recommendations where we load, the section of the site that says other homes you might like. There's a lot of sites that just randomly pick homes that have nothing to do with actually what you might like. Homefinity actually tracks what users are looking at, bedrooms, bathrooms, city, price point, and uses that information to intelligently recommend other homes they might like. And that
Okay.
changes on every single page for every single user. It's unique to every single person.
So let's just get nerdy for
Mhm.
60 more seconds and then we'll wrap up and let everyone catch their breath. My thought is that the reason the next paint score drops then for those so much is because there's so many back and forth calls and dynamic content that must be generated and then painted.
So mostly that second part, right? So that
Yeah.
JavaScript frameworks, they put a huge load, a huge amount of responsibility to actually render the visual components of the website on the device that's looking at it, right? So
Mm,
all of the responsibility to render it is now on your phone or on your laptop, whereas more traditional sort of server-side rendering languages, or sort of the approach that we generally use comes down, the page is ready to render as soon as it hits the browser. And those kind of issues they don't need the browser to be strong, to have lots of free memory, to have lots of browser or
yeah.
graphic GPU sort of capacity. When
Uh-huh.
you click something on those JavaScript front end frameworks, the muscle better be on the machine. And even though they're probably, they're okay,
You
it's
just
going to be
defined
slower.
why Melanie Oakley's core web vitals for all of her experiences must be terrible, because if you have 5,000 open tabs on
Yes.
your Safari browser and 50 apps open at all times, this
Mhm.
is what I always this is so funny, Dennis. She'll be trying to buy something on an e-commerce website and she's constantly like, how come she'll just hand me the phone and she's like, you do it. This is so frustrating to me. And the first thing I do is like close out everything
Right.
and then I just do it. And she's
Mhm.
like, I don't know how you always get this stuff to work. And
Yeah, that's because when the sort of browser bar looks like a saw blade at the top, that's normally a sign you got too many tabs open, right? Or when you can't see all the tabs, like scrolling through on the phone. Yeah,
yeah, no,
it's
that's
very
super
common.
interesting. I
Yeah,
don't think we got too technical at all. I think that
good.
I think the most of the audience is going to understand that. And this comes down to that feeling of like, why are we using the technology we use? Like we know if we were going to make a birdhouse and someone said, let's get out the chainsaw, or let's use a drone. It's like the latest technology, right?
Right.
A first person drone to build a birdhouse. You'd be like, that's ridiculous. But
Yeah.
too oftentimes we're in such a race to just use the newest tools that we
Yes.
do not think through the appropriateness for the use.
100%. 100%.
At least
Yeah.
when it comes to Core Web Vitals. I'm sure there may be other um, perceived, not necessarily real benefits to those other
Mm,
programming languages, but when it comes to Core Web Vitals, it seems to not be helpful in responsiveness.
100%. Yeah, it's definitely it is a very common. I mean, it's a crystal clear issue when you compare sort of the differences between those frameworks and others. So yeah,
Okay,
they do tend to suffer from that. There's no question about it.
final question, final real question, and then I'll try to come up with two fake questions to end on a lighthearted note. What do you feel like is the most requested? It doesn't matter if it's let me just say an accurate, necessary request, but in the subconscious and consciousness of home builders everywhere that you interact with, what do they feel like they need to have on their website that
Mhm.
like, yeah, I guess I'll just leave it at that. What do you
Yeah,
feel
no, it's
like,
good.
whether it's a rational request or not, or a thought process of I think I should have X, Y, or Z covered?
So right now I'm thinking there's a two-way tie right now in my brain. I can't pick a
Mhm.
winner. So I'll say both. I've got gating content.
Mm,
Because like you said, the lead conversion rate sort of gone down as people are a bit more, they're still lurking, right? But they're just a little hesitant to fill out the fields. We're looking for new ways to collect contact info.
mhm.
So gating content has been sort of a consistent one for several months now. Um, and structured data, which I love that people are actually talking about structured data and thinking about it. But that's another
Yeah, who
geeky
are those
topic.
people? That's weird. People are talking about structured data.
No, right. Like, I'm glad somebody wants to talk to me about structured data.
Voluntarily?
Yes,
Is someone
please let me
holding a gun to
talk.
their head? You're voluntarily talking about structured data. I don't understand
Yeah.
you.
Somebody
anymore.
told them that they needed structured data, and or they listened, or they read one of our blog
Okay.
posts from a while ago. But yeah,
Oh,
that's
that's
good.
good.
I'm glad. I'm
That's
glad.
good. Yeah, that's more nerdy than I really want to get to, but I agree that that is a good one.
Next
And
episode.
the gated content, at least the context I always come to that is this idea of creating unexpected content that's of super high value
Mhm.
and saying, how can we let the customer give us a little bit in order to gain access? So, like,
Yeah.
I think I was on, in fact, I know I was on one of your websites the other day of someone we don't work with, and they just had the ability to create an account by picking, I think it was an Apple login or Amazon or something else. And it was like, this is what everyone should be. I've continued to say, just let people use their phone number.
Mhm.
Like, until you get to the point of pricing and mortgage and everything else,
Mhm.
then you could say, you know what, you need to add a password, but we don't need people to lock down with two-factor authentication their home
Right.
builder account.
Yeah. Yeah.
What we do need is more first party data. And that's the other, a lot of times I say contacts, we're getting more contacts with that,
Mm,
that offering of high value content for a little bit of information,
yeah.
but not necessarily leads.
I agree. But it's making it sort of easy for them to sign up, easy for them to opt in, and just at
Mm-hmm.
least give you the ability to stay in touch. Because who knows how long these people might be lurking?
Yeah,
Who knows what it is that's keeping them on the fence? If you just let them give you an email address, and then we email
right.
them a password so they can log into their
I
account later.
and I understand where that feeling of urgency comes from around being able to stay in touch. I would recommend still, though, that most of you listening throw that out and just start thinking about getting the permission to listen.
Hmm.
You don't have to get in touch, but you have to get their permission to be able to listen and observe what they're doing
Hmm.
at a layer beyond just anonymous website visitor.
Hmm. That's a good point.
And that way it can carry through to other data, other analysis you're doing,
Mhm.
the ads that you're running, everything else.
Yeah, retargeting, Infinity collects the data of known users and what they're looking at. So all of that's a great insight to be able to sort of know, how to respond to somebody when they're ready to reach out, what they've been looking at, what they've been shopping
That's
for.
right. Okay,
Yeah.
here's I'm looking at a bookshelf. I saw Will Duderstadt. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I saw he just posted his 5 favorite books of all time. You
Yeah.
seem to have, I'm guessing, 40 books behind you.
Probably for those two
Uh,
shelves. Yeah, there's a little bit more up higher and below
favorite
than you.
favorite book of all time first.
Finite and Infinite Games by James Carse.
When did that come out? Is that old or
It's not new. No, that's a
yeah?
good question. I know that it was old when I read it, and I read it about probably 15, 16 years ago, something like
Okay.
that for the first time.
So the concept of life is an infinite game, is that?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that we tend to overemphasize or overvalue the finite games and the ability to
Mm-hmm.
sort of recognize when the acceptableness that somebody else might just be playing a different game than you, and that's okay. Right.
Well,
But
the
yeah.
easier example for anyone who's married or has someone who is in your life, like a person you're married to, it's the example is when you win the argument, but you lose, right?
He's like, what are you after? Right. It's like parenthood and
You can win the infinite
relationships. It's
game of
like,
marriage, or you can win today's argument. Which
right,
one is more
exactly.
important to you?
Yes,
Mhm.
that's when you're like, remember, respond for the outcome you want, not for what you feel, right? Like that one. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then of the books behind you, you can take 3 seconds to peek at them if you need to. Which one is
Hmm.
your favorite?
Um, I'm gonna say there's one further down on the shelf that I could grab. It is the first one that comes to mind out of this list back here is uh a biography of Samurai Musashi. Um,
Wow,
and
that's a deep
really,
cut
yeah.
with a katana blade.
Literally.
Yeah.
But it is a fascinating story. Of course, it's obviously, it's not an autobiography, but it's told from legend, based
Uh-huh.
upon his life and his life history. And it's,
Wow.
I think I like biographies a lot lately. They tend to be, just sort of reading the history of sort of the path that somebody takes
Yeah.
through life is pretty amazing.
I do like biographies. And in particular, I like autobiographies, although biographies are great too. And the main takeaway now, this hit me about 10 years, 15 years ago. is that every autobiography I've ever read by a, in air quotes, great person
Uh-huh.
is filled with self-doubt and uncertainty.
Hmm.
And yet today, when we think about all of the great people that we're connected with, et cetera, it's like this continual projection of I've got it all figured out.
Yeah.
So
Do you think it's
yeah, well, that could be a whole other
no,
podcast
it's a great question. Yeah.
conversation.
It's like, is it just performative or did people back at the time, when those people historically lived their life, did they give off an air of confidence that wasn't, you know, did they sort of put a different face on for the public, and in secret doubted themselves, right?
Right. So that's the first thing is one, it doesn't really matter. In either case, everyone you know or think of as a leader or this quote unquote great person
Mm-hmm.
is struggling with uncertainty and doubt. All of them, 100%. So
Mm-hmm.
then that also, like by definition, helps you understand who has got a better mask of or the ability to poker face this into I'm awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Or a
And not
better
that the
social
other
media
the
team.
other
Right?
extreme isn't helpful either, right? Of I'm a
Mm.
constant mess and I don't know what's going like that's not
It's not super uplifting, right? Yeah. Or not
follow me,
inspiring, maybe.
charge. We might die. I think I don't know. It's really scary over there, but follow me. And then the other thing is that it does strike me that the longer you go back in time,
Mm-hmm.
for I think the majority of them have been more honest, at least with their closer peer group of that uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
So you can read letters from many of the initial founding fathers to other acquaintances who are like, I don't know. I don't know if this is working out or not. I don't know if this is
Mm-hmm.
heading the right way or not. Certainly when they, when Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address,
Mm-hmm.
he probably wasn't like shaking in his boots. He's a great orator, but
Mm-hmm.
we
He's probably
definitely know there were times where he was like, I don't know if I'm going to hold this country together. So
right. Yeah. That's a good
didn't think
one.
that's where we'd end, but that's why we ask the random questions
That's right.
sometimes.
It's a good one.
That was a
It's
good one.
Reminds me, I need to finish the Alexander Hamilton biography. I got about halfway through and had to stop.
Is there a song at the end?
There is not. It's sort of similar to the musical, but yeah, I'm only halfway through. I'm not quite at intermission yet, but
All right.
yeah,
Well, Dennis, thanks for stopping by.
my
We'll
pleasure.
have you on again soon and with another insightful conversation about dead presidents and core web vitals or something like that.
Unnertify structured data or something, maybe.
There we go.
All right.
We'll see
Thanks,
ya.
Kevin. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.